Hey, how you doing? Gavin here from
Would you subscribe?
Hologram Productions. Today I decided to give myself a wee bit of a challenge because a number of people have been requesting it. I'm going to do the music of Jamie XX.
No word of it.
Focus on his music from the album In Colour, specifically focusing on the track you hear in the background, The Rest Is Noise, one of my favourite tracks on the album. I'm also going to throw in a bit of work on tracks such as Seesaw, Sleep Sound and Stranger in a Room. So for The Rest Is Noise, we're going to start with the drums. I'm going to draw on the break beat for the kick. The processing on the kick is very important. There's a lot of reverb on it and not many highs, so you roll them off, transpose it down a little bit, boost the subs with EQ8, squeeze the transient using drum bus to make it thicker, and add hybrid reverb to give it a bit of distance. Use mid-side EQ to roll off the lows in the stereo and also boost the highs. Personal tutorials, that is my email. The kick sounds good, but it needs more high-end transient, so I layer it up using a found sound transient, tighten it up using drum bus and rolling off the lows, and together they sound tight. The claps need to sound human, so here's a sample of 14 individual human claps, which I put into simpler and put into slice mode. And the claps hit on the 2 and the 4, hitting different claps every single time so they sound more human. And then you add glue and reverb. Together they sound like this. Now we need a shaker. You could just find a splice sample of a human shaker, but I found an individual slice of an individual sample and tried to humanize it using the following technique where you vary the attack and delay for every single hit. Oh yeah, roll off the very highs. All of Jamie XX sounds are very soft. Follow the MIDI for the piano notes. This is just the generic Ableton grand piano sound with a bit of reverb on it. It sounded very close to the original, so I stuck with it. See, we're already getting pretty close. Now the original track has this kind of siren sound in the background, so to make it I found a random sound of a flute, I transposed it up and I tried to experiment with a bunch of audio effects including chorus to make it wobble. I glued it down to make sure that there are no piercing highs. I added a hybrid reverb again to give it some distance, and then to give it some crunch I added amp and OTT. And you can see it actually sounds fairly close to the original. But it has some sharp resonance spikes, so bring them down using EQ8, as you see here. Now there are some faded washy pad sounds in the background which sound like faded vocals. I've no idea what he used, so I just found an a cappella, stretched it out so it just sounds really warped and faded, added a lot of reverb, and I cut off the highs and make sure the volume is low so that it's just a texture in the background. Now the reverse looped sound at the very beginning was the hardest to reproduce because I don't know what sample I used, so I just found a sample of an analog saw and I put it into simpler. I used the envelope and the filter to create a sort of a chop sound. And again, I experimented with EQ, boosting some of the mid frequencies, again gluing them down so they're soft, amplifying it in order to give it a bit of crunch, OTT, even more crunch, and reverbed that sound out, and then EQ'd off the lows. And then I put in the MIDI, which sounded somewhat similar to the original. Now, as an idea all of its own, I think it sounds perfectly decent, but in comparison with the original, of course it's going to sound lame, but that's because you have to take on board the creativity and freedom that comes with the original sampling technique. I suspect he built the entire track around this original loop. The intro has a low rolled off 4 to the floor kick, for which I used, just for the intro, a vinyl kick, and I rolled off the lows. For the bass and the breakdown, trusty sine wave in wavetable, and I followed the MIDI notes, which has a dum 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 octave jumping style bass. Noise unison to the measurements you see on screen. Sine wave with minus 22% warp. Pay attention to the attack and decay times, as you can see on the screen. Add a bit of pedal to give a bit of crunch. Utility to put the bass in mono, and then roll off the super subs. So now let's move on to Stranger in a Room. Here's the lead, which I made using analog. It's a single oscillator saw wave with the filter pulled down and the envelope turned up. Throw on a lot of reverb to wash it out, roll off the lows, And I have a couple of manipulable macros to change the parameters. You'll notice there are two instruments on the chain. I also used a Zebra 2 preset, which I thought sounded nice. But I just had that in the background to give the sound more texture. Now, before I move on to Sleep Sound, I had to identify what samples he used. The website Who Sample is really good for this. I could identify the following 3 samples. It's a Blue World for the acapella, Alicia Keys for the oh-oh sound, and a sample by a track called Hippodrome for the drums. So Jamie would have leafed through this acapella and spliced 3 or 4 segments together, and then he used the following autopan technique using the settings that you can see on the screen, and then you get that lovely rhythmic chop. And again, you boost the highs using OTT. Jamie XX never uses straightforward kicks, so I layered it using a standard 808 with a bit of a lo-fi thump as well. The bass was quite difficult to figure out because it sounded to have a bit of a pitch bend. It's your standard operator sine wave on one oscillator, FM'd with the second oscillator, and I followed the MIDI as close as I possibly could, as my ear told me to. And there's a pitch bend here, which makes it go do, a bit like that. And then there's a saturator using a wave shaper to give it a bit of thickness. The oh-oh sound wasn't originally quantized, so I had to chop them all and move them to make sure that they hit the rhythm at the correct time. For Seesaw, we take a breakbeat by a track called Looking Like a Nut Nut. We slice that in, make sure it's quantized to the right time. This is a Reese bass, which I've taught how to make in my Yotto and Latrell videos with a descending 4-note structure. Again, never use standard kicks. These are lo-fi kicks, which were recorded using a microphone and an amp, and I just used a transient in the second half of the kick, and it seemed to work. It has exactly that deep lo-fi texture that I want. For the pad, the noise, amount, and voices are maxed out to 8 and 100, and then lots of reverb. Diva HS Prodigal is the closest preset I could find to something that sounded like the lead in Seesaw. So as Ableton remakes go of classics, it's not utter rubbish. Arrangement time. Now I grouped each 4 songs into 4 separate groups, and I threw a saturator on top of everything to give it a bit of crunch sound. So let's have a listen. That's coming up is my favorite bit, which is that descending piano riff, which is one of my favorite piano riffs in electronic music. It was really hard to do. Let's have a look at some of my attempts at trying to do it. Take 1. Take 2. Take 3. Take 4. God, this is rubbish. Take 5. Yep. Not sounding bad. Ugh, shit. Take 7 or 8, I don't remember. Yeah, close enough. Let's chuck into the track. Right, that was fun, trying to pretend that I was doing a live set version of his music. As always, you can go here in order to download the samples and use them at your leisure. Link in the description. I do hope that fans of Jamie XX enjoyed the reproduction of 4 of those tracks. For those of you listening who were hoping that I would do different tracks on the album, well, sod off, don't be greedy. You've had 4, so enjoy that much. If you're looking to learn more, I'm pretty sure you'll be aware that Julian Earl has a whole bunch of videos on Jamie XX to break down some of the sounds, which are pretty good. And also Beats by Vanity TV has a really good breakdown of the kind of music that he makes, so enjoy them. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you all. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!